last, 10 years or so in an apartment in back of us in Minneapolis, in the same block but around the corner. And she loved that little place, but she'd come over every day. I would fix her hair, she'd bake cookies. Sometimes I would be going to work a few days and she'd be there for our children. But after she died, I couldn't believe how many little things that I should have asked her that I never thought to ask her. And I thought, I'm just not going to let this happen to our children. And I really especially wanted them to know about what the county farm was, why we had it in the first place, and then of course it was Depression years, and then it got into some of this about the Depression. I was having a terrible time trying to figure out how to write this, because I started out, I wanted to write about family. Because my grandparents had owned this land, it was especially important. My dad had gone to business school and so forth, and had ended up in Montana first in some bank there. I don't know how long he was there, it couldn't have been too long. Then he ended up in North Dakota in a bank, and that's where he met my mother. And he and another man had a grocery store there, and when farm income dropped 44% in 2 years, he lost the store. The farmers, they couldn't come and buy. It included farm equipment as well as many other things. So he ended up just struggling, went back to farm, and it was terrible. The years were terrible. And evidently, I suspect some of my other relatives had decided that, hey, the county farm needs a supervisor, why don't you apply, his home place. So I think I read it was something like over 100 applicants, and he did get the job. He probably wondered sometimes if he should have, but that's where we grew up then, from 1931 to 43. But, you remember that old song? Some of you might remember that old song that said that, the lady was going to go to poor farm. That was the big fear. Oh, if you aren't careful, if you aren't careful with your money, you're going to end up at the poorhouse, And it had a negative connotation to it. So I thought, I really would like people to know what place that was. I thought it was wonderful. So I wrote it then because of the family legacy, to inform our children about the poor farms and give them an insight into Depression years. And I really wanted them to know how you can have a lot of fun with very little. The chief complaint I hear from grandparents nowadays is, those grandkids, they have way too much stuff. And I think some of you can identify with that. So I started talking to my siblings whenever they came. Our whole family has just done an awful lot of moving. But Glenn, in his last years, was in Alaska. He'd been up there for 11 years, came back and was in Minnesota, and then went back to Alaska and retired there. And when he would come down, and return especially, they would stay 2 to 3 weeks, going to visit others, then coming back to our house. I would nail him, and we'd get him around the table, and he'd sit there and talk. He described these residents to the hair on their nose. He just loved talking about it. And he had enjoyed those people so much. And then my older brother, he was always too busy. Paul was always too busy. His visits were shorter. He lived closer, but we saw less of him, but always would come to our house. But I would get some information from him. So I also came down here and went through microfilm at the Estville Library. I really was sure I remembered an article that had told in the Estville Daily, I thought, that had told how reasonably they were keeping the people at the county farm and how it was such a bargain, essentially. And so I decided there must be something in those. My neck just hurt. I just sat there for hours going through microfilm. I could not find anything. Sometime later, he'd come for something else and be here for a short while and go back. And so these little adventures into history were pretty brief sometimes. But I was determined I was going to meet Herb Ellison if I possibly could. And lo and behold, I found out I could. And got to his house and talked to him. And that was the most interesting. And we just dreaded these county supervisors coming, you know. They always had just to have everything apple polished and everything was just so. But Herb was the one, of course, usually that probably going to get in trouble here. Made the most noise. But he was a character, and my older brother Paul, he would tell about some of Herb's antics. Oh, of course, the classic was Herb riding into guards in the hotel lobby, which to me was like riding in an elegant New York hotel. I mean, he rode into the lobby of the guards hotel on his horse on the day of the Memorial Day parade. And so when I visited with him, here he was. You know, he was way up in years ahead of pain. He was walking with effort, but he was so gracious. He took me and let me talk to him. And finally, just before we left, I said, Herb, I've got to ask you. What I remember most about you is about your ride into the Gardston Hotel. Oh, I tell him that was my brother. He said. And he gave me a bit of advice that I didn't take, and I really regret it. He said, if you want more information, go to Ibadell Ross. I never felt I couldn't take the time that day, and I never got to talk to her, and I feel that was a real big loss, because I'm sure she would have been tremendously helpful. But I did then start getting interested in thinking, I wanted to write about some of these people, but I knew, how old was I when this man did this or someone else did that? And I thought, I can't put it all into perspective. So I went to the courthouse intending to spend a little time there, down here, and asked one of the girls, could I go through some of the county records and see what I could find out about those years when we were out there at the county farm? Well, she thought so, but she wanted to check. And I can't remember the name of that lawyer. It's a lady down here. Worth on the end of it, I think is the name of it. Yeah, Philipworth, yeah. So she came over, of course. I felt like I was being inspected in a way. She was very nice, but I mean, they have to protect, you know, who's going to go in there and dig in the records. So, but she was very nice, and she said, that's fine, go ahead. So we spent hours. Old sat with me going through one thing after another, but I found things that were so interesting. And it did give me, it was very helpful to get some idea how old I was when some of these people were there. But this is what really jarred my teeth out. When I read, okay, October 4th, 1933. Be it hereby resolved by the Board of Supervisors of Emmet County, Iowa, that any person receiving aid from Emmet County who shall be suspected of spending money for luxuries or non-essentials, such as attending picture shows, running automobiles, making use of radios and telephones, attending dances, pool halls, and other places of amusement where fees are charged, getting permanent waves or other hair operations of similar nature, purchasing intoxicating liquor or spending their funds for gambling or other extravagances, shall be immediately dropped from the poor relief roll and receive no further assistance from the county until such suspicions are removed by such person. No different than today, huh? And then, in 1935 and 1930, in between there, I found this in there over and over and over, and there'd be a whole list of names after them. It said, whereas, and then they list all these names, are now living in Emmet County, Iowa, without having acquired a settlement herein. Whereas it is the desire of the Board of Supervisors to prevent the acquiring thereof of said parties and their respective descendants, it is moved and seconded notice be served in accordance with Code Sections 5315 and 5316. And the chairman of this board is hereby authorized to sign same on behalf of this board. Have any of you ever heard of anything like that? Ever heard anybody talk about it? Have you?
Long time ago.
Long time ago, yeah? Well, I tried to find out what those two code numbers were, and nobody could tell me. And I was so furious. I was wondering how it was stated. But then an older fellow who used to live quite close to us on the farm, I talked to him when I was down here, and he said, oh, sure, I remember that. The sheriff would come and tell them they had to leave. Well, that was a little different, too. So, anyway, I eventually got all the things put together and made a rough draft copy, just Xerox the pages and spiral bound them, enough to make 4 copies. We were going to have some family gathering, and I thought, this is my chance. I'll give them the copies, one to each of my siblings, and then they can just make notes. I gave them suggestions on what to do, extra paper, and I said, just let me know, what do you see differently, what do you remember differently, or what do you think is wrong? And they all went through it, and not a single person gave me a suggestion. So if there's something wrong, by the way, the first edition, I had the wrong name on the Catholic Church here. Thank goodness, a classmate of mine, someone had given her a book. She's down in North Carolina. And she wrote me the nicest letter afterward, but she said, Betty, do you know you got the wrong name on the Catholic Church? And she was Catholic, so I felt badly about that, but I changed it for the second printing. So, anyway, I did the rough copies, gave it to them. They had no changes. I was kind of disappointed. But my brother Paul, the businessman, said to me on his second visit after that, he said, Betty, what are you going to do about that? And I said, oh, I don't know. I guess I'll have to wait till the Xerox copies go on cheaper rate, and maybe I can make enough copies so that each of you will have one, and maybe just a few for a few other people. And he said there, he didn't say much, and finally he said, I have a friend. Of course, my brother had been in the paper business for years. And he said, I have a friend who deals with companies who print little booklets. He said, he's about to retire. Well, next thing he gives me the word, he's going to retire in March, Betty. You better get it done. So he helped me get the first printing. It wasn't for free by any means, but still, it was wonderful to get it done. And then just when we were about to get it printed, my niece, this is her thing, doing all this fancy stuff on here. That's her job, her work. She said, Betty, I want to do that. I said, oh, Krista, that would be a lot of work. I want to do it. So that took us a little longer, but bless her heart, she did it, and I think she did a great job. Now, the buildings, something about the land. The size of it was almost like roughly 250 acres. For a kid, it was just a wonderful place. I mean, we had a railroad, we had the creek, we had trees. I wrote a poem. I almost brought the copy. Thank goodness you didn't have to listen to that one. But it was, I just, from childhood, I just have the most wonderful memories of going into that woods and finding the beautiful wildflowers in the spring, of going down to that creek, and, it was fun. It wasn't very deep most of the time. And it was just a fun place to play, and just even watching the water. It's just those wonderful, precious times. So, but even the railroad tracks were fun. A little scary sometimes, but let's see now. The animals, we had just, we had cows, horses, everything was done by horses, and no tractors. And of course, the big threshing. Glenn gave me wonderful notes on this labor-intensive farming of those years, and I still have them. But I couldn't figure out how I was going to fit that in. That was my part of the story, and I thought if I go off onto a track, I'll get clear off. So I didn't put it in. I hope he was too disappointed. If he was, he didn't tell me. But another thing I want to tell you before I go too far, my grandmother in 1902 had written a letter to a cousin over in St. Ansgar, and I can't tell you, I I bet it wasn't more than a year before I was putting some of the final things together. And it had been in Norwegian, translated to English. And my grandmother then, and my grandparents who had lived there on that farm, wrote, Saturday, January 11th was a great day for us when relatives and friends from far and near surprised us on our 25th wedding anniversary. It was entirely unexpected. We knew nothing about it, but our children knew about it. I had much work to do that day, as usual, on Saturdays, but the children did everything they could to hinder me. The forenoon passed quickly. I said, we have to make dinner now. But Gina, our youngest daughter, insisted there's no hurry with dinner. It doesn't matter if we have dinner before 1 o'clock, she said. She was too busy cleaning the lamps. Then our daughter Rose said, here comes Ostro Narbo. You have to go out and meet him. So I did. He asked if Halston was home. Yes, just drive your horses over to the barn. Halston is there. Then Gulick Coleman came, and Halston said, this will be nice. We men can have a good talk. They came in and took off their coats and overshoes and went into the other room and sat down. Then I went upstairs to get something, and Rosine called to me to come down because somebody wanted to see me outside. I looked out the window, and there was Pastor Strand and his wife driving. Behind them came many teams and rigs full of people. The women had baskets full of food and took over the whole house. The table was quickly set with all kinds of good food, and we who were honored guests had to sit at the first setting along with Pastor Strand and his wife and closest relatives. Then they came and set gifts in front of us, and Pastor spoke a short message about the occasion. Then he turned the gifts over to us, which consisted of a silver coffee server, sugar bowl, spoon holder, cream pitcher, coffee box, cake basket, and berry dish, plus $4. Everything in silver. Grandma Holt's letter goes on to explain the joyfulness of the occasion. Later in the evening, the young people came. They had contributed toward the gift. The table was prepared again, and when everyone had eaten, they began to play music and sing, and to play some games until 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, you know, maybe that is just another letter written by someone in 1902, but it was such a thrill to read that and to think I could envision those wagons coming with the people and the horses coming up that wide driveway, and I thought, that's the place where we grew up, and that's where they had these wonderful, happy events. And I thought, how nice to have that memory and that information. And as far as the kind of residents we had out there, I think you kind of know the cross-section, but it would be alcoholics, which included a lot of interesting stories, and handicapped people, some that just absolutely could not get a job. I think one of the most interesting things was when one of our young men went off into the CC camp, and that was the best thing that ever could have happened to him. Oh, his mother was also out there, and she was so proud of him. It just gave them a lift. And then we had this fellow who, I got to read you the story about him. The one who okay. And of course I changed these names. Mr. Halstead was a resident who made a considerable impression on me. I cannot recall ever hearing his first name. He was always Mr. Halstead to all of us. County records reveal that he was with us over a year, but I remember him only as an invalid, always in bed. He lived in the one cottage closest to the main house, a dull gray building. Although it consisted of 2 rooms, he lived only in the larger one, to the front of the house. A straight-back chair faced his bed. A small stand stood near his head with a 4-drawer chest nearby. The how and why of my first visit escapes me. Perhaps my mother suggested it, since he was alone and in bed all day. It surely was not because he was a vibrant personality to whom I was drawn. Actually, I was frightened of him at first sight. His piercing, sunken eyes seemed to search hungrily for the appearance of someone in this doorway. someone to break the monotony of his day. Tissue-thin skin pulled tightly across his prominent nose, which curved inward at the tip, like a hawk's beak. His skeletal arms ended in long, bony fingers, which usually lay still on his faded blue blankets. He moved only when a deep, convulsing cough wrenched his chest and upper body. I winced as he spewed thick, sticky phlegm into dingy white handkerchiefs torn from old, worn bed sheets. But my discomfort at the sight of him evaporated as he spoke. His sensitivity and sincerity touched my young heart. Early in my visits, he asked me to pick up 2 poetry books from the top of his chest of drawers. They were almost identical, not only in size and shape, but in degree of wear. Each was yellowed with age, the corners widely rounded from frequent turning of the pages. In book 1, he said, pointing a trembling, gnarled finger toward the book on my lap. Page 34, he whispered. Then as I found the page, he added, read, home. This was my introduction to the folksy poems of Edgar A. Guest. As I read, it takes a heap of living to make a house a home, a heap of sun and shadow, and you sometimes have to roam before you really appreciate the things you left behind. Mr. Halstead leaned easily onto his pillow, smiling, soaking in each word and phrase as I read. Beautiful, he sighed. That was when I began to appreciate the poems that he loved. On another visit, he requested Longfellow's poem, The Children's Hour. As I read Between the Dark and the Daylight, he whispered them along with me. When the night is beginning to lower, comes a pause in the day's occupation that is known as the Children's Hour. One day he asked me to read another Longfellow poem, The Village Blacksmith. By then, I looked forward to reading to him. His deep appreciation for words was contagious. I loved the phrase, toiling, rejoicing, sorrowing, onward through life he goes. And the beautiful closure, thanks to thee, my worthy friend, for the lesson thou hast taught. Thus, at the flaming forge of life, our fortunes must be wrought. Thus, on its sounding anvil shaped, each burning deed and thought. Before he died, Mr. Halstead gave me his 2 poem books. How I treasured them. I just wanted to give you a little insight into who some of these people were and why I feel that I grew up rich by growing up on the poor farm. But it was people like that that did that. I'm going to read you just one other one from, and this is the one I get the most comment on. At the very beginning. Few 11-year-old girls in my 5th grade class had curly hair. I blended in with the great majority wearing what I called the Depression-era haircut. Straight hair, parted in the middle, cut short with just the tip of my earlobe showing. And of course, bangs cut straight across my forehead, at least an inch above my eyebrows. Usually I felt comfortable with this very ordinary look, but this particular day presented a different situation. My teacher had asked me to represent our class in a school program. This meant speaking in front of an auditorium full of people that evening, alone. My tummy churned at the thought of it. On the long school bus ride home that afternoon, this was all I could think about. I was glad Mother suggested I wear my robin's egg blue dress. But what about my hair? If only I had curly hair. I envisioned Shirley Temple's head full of bouncing golden curls, and I wished I had just a few. Arriving home, Mother gave me my favorite after-school snack, freshly baked graham bread with peanut butter and honey. For a moment, I forgot my concerns. Mother had already started evening meal preparations for our family and for everyone living upstairs in this county home. I didn't want to bother her with my worry. What could she do? So I slipped upstairs to chat with Dan, a resident, one of my good friends. He had come to us following surgery which amputated his right leg above the knee. His stump was finally beginning to heal, but it still limited his activity. He welcomed a visitor. He was sort of a grandpa with a friendly, round face and light blue eyes, a fringe of auburn hair, circling bald pate. Well, how's my girl, he asked, nodding towards the straight, that's my bifocal, nodding towards the straight-back chair beside his bed. Tell me what you did in school today. I barely heard his question. Instead of answering, I blurted, did you know that I have to give a talk at school tonight? My legs swung wildly as I spilled out my deepest concern. I wish I had curly hair instead of this old straight stuff. Dan sat a bit, looking down, thoughtful. Then, perhaps because he had raised a daughter and understood how I felt, he asked, do you know where you can get a curling iron? Did I know? My heart almost leaped out of my body. I bounded downstairs 2 steps at a time. Shortly, I produced Mother's curling iron from her dresser drawer. Dan had already lit the kerosene lamp on the bedside table. Smiling as he suspended the curling iron into the lamp chimney, he said, maybe we can do something about this problem. He waited, then lifted the iron out of the lamp, gingerly touched the long metal tip. It had to be hotter or it would not work, he said. I wiggled impatiently in the chair until he again withdrew the iron, moistened his left index finger, and touched it to the iron. Hearing the sizzle of the water on the iron, he announced, now we are ready. Then, dipping his finger into a glass of water at the bedside, he picked up a small lock of my hair, wound it tightly with his fingers, and wrapped it snugly onto the curling iron. Turning it under and up, he held each curl firmly until he was sure the curl was set. He sat on the edge of his bed, one leg dangling and his stump resting near the edge. I turned slowly in the chair as he instructed. I finally had my entire head covered with pearls. My joy was irrepressible. I could feel the curls jiggle as I walked down the stairway, stiff-necked, fearing they might loosen and fall straight before the evening event. Thanks to my good friend, in my mind, for a few minutes on that day, I was Shirley Temple. I tell you these because I just think it gives you a little insight into, they were just like our grandmas and grandpas upstairs, you know, so we really enjoyed these people. And I'm sure my mother was glad too. Okay, who else did we get there? We got these people sentenced to 30 days either in jail or hard labor. Like, you know, shooting a duck out of season. You think they'd get ready? You think they'd get 30 days for that nowadays? So, anyway, that's the insight into the book. I suppose there are a million other things. But I want to tell you just a few other things that have happened because of this book. I want to tell you one other thing first. I'm going to tell you the favorite part of the book is my reflections. You know, I never even thought about it until we got to that, and I thought, how did this really affect each of us? And growing up, there are 4 of us. Growing up among, because I remember a relative saying, or I had heard that she had said, is that the place that you should raise a family? And you know, I think she learned to know that it was a good place. But I look and I think, both of my brothers have died now. But Paul worked at least his last 10 years as a volunteer, head of a foundation in Appleton, Wisconsin. And it had started with $5,000 before he took over. But they've got into the millions. I mean, that's going to give them a base in that city that they will always be able to help people. And I think, what a wonderful thing to do. He also worked in a zillion other things, but that was his last legacy. And my brother Glenn, well, he just, of course, he loved to talk about these people, to describe them. He, I think, had a little bit of theatrics in him. But he ended up, many of his last years were working with the native Alaskans. And I tell you, I was there for his funeral. I was there more than that. But that room was just packed with people, and these huge choir of native Alaskans sang. And I talk about it. But they loved him, you know, and he loved being there. And so many of these people were just common, ordinary people struggling through life. But he was there to help them. And then my sister teacher, and I've with 10 nurses, and I don't know if that's significant, but I think it's in a caring role. That's what I'm saying. Okay, now, what happened? You wouldn't believe what's happened with this book. This is not a book that an English teacher would give me an A on, I can tell you that. But I just had to do the best I could. And at that time, because I had a pressure, I was up till 4 o'clock one morning getting this thing ready for my brother, I tell you. Anyway, I was asked to present a paper on this at Augustana College in Sioux Falls for the 31st Annual Dakota Conference. Now, I tell you, if you want to go to something interesting, that is an interesting thing. They have more interesting history things. I suppose they have one in Iowa. Do they have something like that? And then in November '99, a former Esterville gal had gotten wind of this book, and she recognized immediately the area and everything, and she was lining up an expo for, listen to this, hemp and sustainable farming. And she talked me into going up to Alexandria at the Arrowwood Hotel for their whole 2 days of and have a table with the books. And I did. It was interesting. Even had a radio interview that morning, which wasn't top of my list. But another thing, Farm Bureau magazine down here in Iowa wrote a wonderful article about this, and that was in Family Living, April 2002. And then, how many in here have ever been to Höstfest in Mina? Well, I tell you, that is the Mecca for Scandinavians. Lowell has brothers who go there every year like it's a pilgrimage to Mecca. And so I thought, well, we should go someday. And we did go once. And it's just a fun thing. But anyway, a gal from Rochester called me once, and she needed a Norwegian. She had heard about my book. She had written a book about a man who had ridden the orphan train as a youngster and was selected by a family in the Midwest and was raised in the Midwest and ended up eventually in North Dakota as the first governor. She'd written this book, but she wasn't Norwegian, so they weren't sure if she should be in the Höstfest, even though he was governor of North Dakota. So she wanted to write on my coattails or have me write on hers or something. But anyway, that's how she got in, is because I had went up there with my book. So that's 2 years in a row. And then there was another convention in St. Cloud that had activities workers who work in nurses' homes. And it is in the library at Esterville, Des Moines, the State Historical Society of Iowa, Living History Farms, Des Moines, Otter Tail County Historical Society in Fergus Falls, Grinnell College requested 2 copies. I was so surprised. Minnesota Historical Society, Minnesota Humanities Commission, and I have given talks at several places too. But letters, I don't know if I'll ever throw them, but I mean, a lot of really nice letters of people. Most of them have been maybe living someplace else, and they get the copy from someone who has sent them. 3 that perhaps were especially meaningful to me was Catherine Lundy wrote to me. I mean, anybody who will write a letter, a real letter, handwritten letter, at the week before Christmas, I mean, they really are something. And she had sat down and written this whole letter, and she said she identified with so much of it, and she enjoyed it so much. Then, when I talked to Wallingford down at the church, a gal came up to me who had been on the county farm when I was there. I said she was a little girl, and it was such fun to see her. And then she sent me pictures of some of us when we were just real young, and that was fun to get. And another one was brother of Mary Soper, who was in my 50-year class reunion here. She'd sent her brother the copy of the book, and he wrote a very nice letter afterwards. And those were the main ones. But now, do you have any questions or anything? Because I probably missed all the things that you really wanted to know.
Betty, you said that was Catherine Lundy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Sure.
She lives up in Minnesota somewhere.
Faribault, yeah.
Faribault.
Faribault, yeah. It was fun hearing from her, but she lived next door, we used to ride her bike over and visit the Reds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So, that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much for your day.
sister of Don, Marley, Paul, 3 boys, 1 girl.
Thank you, Betty. If everybody hasn't seen the exhibit back there, I do have a mailbox from the county home that I got off there when they were regrading the road. Forest Ridge had, they weren't using the mailbox. Me being somebody interested in his graphic, I was going to get back to it and throw it away. I'll tell you tomorrow history.
Oh, borrowed it, okay.
But otherwise it's going to be thrown away, but it was the county home and set out in front of the church building. Because I have some information on it, like I dedicated the second section in 1959 when I put the other part of the building on there. And the first part was built in 1923, but Betty was talking about the land, the county bought the land from her grandfather in 1913 for $22,000. And you can see some of the deeds over there in the county home. Itself, the 30 acres and another 80 acres up on the hillside to the west. Lauren Mitchell paid $150,000 for 110 acres. The other land was sold off later. And all that information's over there if you want to see it. Anybody have any questions they want to give to ask Betty?
Fish. On the ever read.
Oh, yes. One thing I forgot about, the Amazon house we have out at the museum, John and Everine lived in that house, and my cousin Carol here used to deliver newspapers to their house. And
No one in for years.
she's donating this station.
Let it go back to it. Put it back in their house.
It's going to be back in the house on Everett's. She knew Everett when she was growing up. She used to deliver newspapers.
Yeah, artificial fruit, get it.
Well, to get some artificial fruit to put in it.
Yeah, you guys can get some artificial fruit, put it in it, and put it back on the table.
So how'd you come to get it then, Carol?
Huh?
How did you come to get it?
She gave it to me a couple years before she died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, beautiful.
So that's
So every time I look at it when I'm home, I think of her. I
it's
feel
a nice donation, Carol.
Huh?
Nice donation.
Yeah, I'd rather see you guys have it.
Welcome. Anything else anybody would have?
Because that's an antique.
Just for curiosity's sake, how many, anybody with a Norwegian background in this room right now?
Something about
Looks like the majority. Otherwise, that's all we have for tonight.
I'm a Swede. I'm fascinated.
We've been listening to stories by Andrew Greeley. Have you read any of that?
No.
Or listened to it? We listened to it on tapes. He's got a couple that take place in Ireland.
Every time I look at it.
And they're real funny because he's got a real